You're listening to Soundside. I'm Scott Greenstone in for Libby Dankman. Longtime Washingtonians, a question for you. Do you remember heading to your local polling place to vote on Election Day? You may not, since our state's evolution towards all-mail voting has been going on for decades. And maybe you get the same feeling of civic pride walking to the mailbox. Washington started conducting all-mail elections in 2014, and it's mostly been smooth sailing since then. But a national explosion of vote by mail during the 2020 election due to COVID sparked a partisan backlash against the practice. President Trump made claims that voting by mail would lead to widespread fraud, accusations that grew louder after he lost that election to President Biden. Now, the Washington State Republican Party has officially come out against vote by mail, and Chairman Jim Walsh says we want to get back to in-person voting. We wanted to talk more about the history of vote by mail in the state and why we were so out in front of it, why we were one of the first. So, Soundside host Libby Dankman sat down with one of the architects of Washington's vote by mail system. Let's listen in to her conversation.
Sam Reed was the 14th Secretary of State in Washington. He retired in 2013. He is a Republican and also the godfather of vote by mail in Washington State. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for being on Soundside. It's good to have you here.
Well, thank you very much, Libby.
How do you like that name, the godfather of vote by mail in Washington State? Do you agree with that title?
Well, many people have referred to me as the one who helped start it and then oversaw its implementation.
Well, your love affair started a long time ago with vote by mail, as you just indicated. Why did you think this was important to do in Washington State?
We initially did it just to make it easier for people to participate in special elections, because since they were not the normal election dates that you have in the fall, we got very poor participation. So we went to the legislature. It was actually a bit of a fight, but we got it passed. It was a bipartisan vote for it, a bipartisan vote against it when we did it. And then that worked so well that we came back the next time to suggest we use it for odd-year primary elections because, again, those have very low participation. They're mainly for nonpartisan offices, many of our low visibility offices. The legislature adopted that. And then we got a bill passed to allow people to choose to vote by mail when they called it permanent absentee. Well, what happened, Libby, is much to our surprise, that took off like a rocket. We expected just people who normally vote absentee would sign up, but instead, people loved it. And we had, in some counties, including mine, I was Thurston County, Olympia's county, we had 50% of the people who signed up for it. And pretty soon we realized, hey, we're conducting two different elections in one day, which was a huge challenge for staff. And that's when we went to the legislature and said, hey, we really need to make this more possible for counties to choose to go vote by mail. So that was initially the way it did. And then later on, as I said, we got it passed for just to make it statewide.
So it sounds like the initial reasons behind it was about participation, especially in off-year elections. And then you saw the response and it became like a practicality thing for counties. Am I gathering that right?
You're right. And then the other factor, Libby, that was very important to me and many Republicans was we also realized this is a way for people to cast more informed ballots. Rather than walking to the polling site and being surprised by officers you don't know about or seeing judicial candidates you've never heard of and all that, you get the ballot in your home, you get out a voter's pamphlet, you look at it, you can discuss it, you can pick up the phone like for judges and call an attorney friend or whatever. And I thought that was a huge advantage. And again, just the convenience as well. And particularly in the state of Washington, where we have considerable international trade, so people are all over the globe. We have big programs for missionaries who are around the world. We have a lot of people in the diplomatic corps, and then corporations like Boeing and all that, who have people around the world. So it really worked well for our state.
How did your fellow Republicans at the time react? Did you get any kind of pushback from either Republicans or Democrats when you were initially introducing this and it was working its way through, to being a statewide thing?
From the rank and file, we did not really get any pushback. From the party operatives, we did, for both parties, because they like the idea of being able to target turnout and contact people who they know would vote their way. And by vote by mail, just everybody would get the ballot and know there was election and could participate. And in fact, Libby, we had an increased participation, more so in special elections, the primaries and such, but for general elections as well. We went from being, I can't remember, 12th, 14th state in the country to always being 1, 2, or 3 in the country.
Oh, that's so interesting. So this was something that in some ways took control away from party apparatus for both the left and the right, and so it made them nervous.
Well, and the other thing that the most upset people were superintendents of schools, where we started using vote by mail for their levy and bond elections, because again, they really had a formula, the people supporting their levies and bonds of targeting again their turnout. But again, it worked out well, because it turned out that more people voted, but they voted basically the same way that they'd been voting before. The districts that had it easy to pass them had it easy. Those who had a tough time continued having a tough time.
But overall, we had more participation.
Yes.
So now we get to today, and we see that the Republican Party in Washington state has officially come out and said, we want to end vote by mail. They also have these other goals. They want voter ID at polling places, hand-counted ballots. They also want to make Election Day a national holiday. In a recent statement, Washington State Republican Party Chair Jim Walsh said, quote, nobody takes responsibility for making sure that registered voters are actual citizens and otherwise legal voters. So let's just take that sort of security element of it, Secretary. Is that correct? Does nobody take responsibility for ensuring that these are citizen votes being cast?
When I was Secretary of State, the first year I was elected, we went to the legislature and got a bill passed to require that for the Department of Licensing, that when they register somebody, they would have to inform them you have to be a citizen of the United States. And also what already was on there is they had to sign that they were a citizen of the United States and subject to criminal penalties if they weren't. So that was one part of it. The other part is that we made those registration records available to the political parties, their public records, so people were checking. And what was interesting, Libby, is when we had the Guajardo-Rossi recount in 2004, which you
that squeaker, yeah,
are aware of, right?
Sure.
We had 5 different organizations get the entire statewide voter registration list and scrutinize it. And they didn't come up with one person who was not a citizen who voted. There were 2 Chinese people who had registered to vote, when they're getting the license. And so first we thought there were 2, but then when we checked, when they received their ballots, they called, it was King County Elections, and said, oops, we're not citizens. We're not supposed to get this. And we made a mistake. We didn't understand, what we're citing, and they returned the ballots. So that doesn't mean there couldn't have been some people who voted who shouldn't vote, because we're talking, well over 1 million people voting, but we did not find non-citizens who were participating in the election.
What do you make of the evolution of your Republican Party on vote by mail and why vote by mail became so controversial for Republicans?
Well, I will point out that in the state of Washington, I have not found it to be controversial among Republicans. I continue to be very active in the Republican Party and particularly in the mainstream Republicans of Washington and helping candidates and all that. And I have not heard that. Now, in 2020, because as you mentioned in the introduction, states used vote by mail. It happened before because of the COVID and all that, and it was very controversial. And so some of President Trump's most passionate supporters, went right along with it in terms of opposing. But what is interesting in 2024, the Trump organization itself was promoting voting by mail.
Yeah, and that worked out for them.
Effort.
Yeah.
Right. So again, it was a surprise and a disappointment.
Before we go, Mr. Secretary, there is a very low likelihood because the legislature is controlled by Democrats and they seem very open to keeping the vote by mail system as it is right now, that this is ever going to actually go away in Washington state. But if there was a move and a successful move to get rid of vote by mail, what would be lost?
Well, I'm sorry, I do have to say, I don't think it would ever pass. Partly because the Republican legislators I know wouldn't vote for such a thing. But because you're saying, what if? It would be a huge challenge because one of the reasons we county auditors were advocating it is how difficult it was to do poll sites elections in the state of Washington. We used to use schools for poll sites. We used to use granges for poll sites. Well, in schools, security all of a sudden became very important. And the last thing they wanted to have was have people traipsing in and out of the school all day. So they no longer allowed us to do that. Places like the Grange have steps, and since this is a public election and all, there were accessibility requirements. So, and the same thing, people used to use homes for polling sites. That no longer work. Secondly, is polling to get the poll workers. We used to have housewives, back in days, and very enthusiastically serve as poll workers. They just aren't available anymore. So it is a lot of relying on the elderly. And again, that became more difficult, and particularly as they aged out and everything. So I personally have fond memories of polling sites. I like the idea of the ceremony of it and, the history of it. But it just turned out to not be practical anymore to do that here in the state of Washington.
I miss the bake sales at the elementary school that I used to vote at. That's what I miss. But you know what? I can get my banana bread elsewhere. And I do enjoy the convenience of vote by mail. Sam Reed, former Secretary of State for Washington, a Republican and a key architect, or, the godfather, if you will, behind the state's vote by mail system. It's a pleasure talking with you again, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Libby.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. And hey, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.